and you're live, Neil. Go.
After 2 weeks.
Take it away.
See what happens when we go away for a week.
All hell breaks loose.
It just goes nuts.
Yeah.
They wait for us to leave, and when we're not paying attention,
Not paying attention.
stuff happens.
We were paying attention.
We were, but they don't know that.
Right.
Yeah. So is it a coup or a mutiny? What happened in Russia last week?
A coup or a mutiny?
Yeah. Or what do we call it? What do we agree to call it? A protest.
A farcical LARP?
A LARP.
A farcical LARP. Usually LARPs are farcical anyway, but just to make the point, it was a farcical LARP, yeah.
Putin didn't say so.
No.
He's not in on the LARP. You're not suggesting he's LARPing too.
No.
No.
No, I mean, ultimately that's what it is. Of course, Putin had to take a strong line against it, and he wasn't going to just dismiss it as nothing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, because it wasn't nothing, but it wasn't nothing. But it was, the whole motivation behind it was just was ridiculous. It was a joke.
Yeah. Okay.
What else is there to say? I mean,
well, I don't know if you want to.
Go ahead.
I mean, just note that the entire Western media couldn't have been more wrong. If I don't know.
But they've been wrong about everything for the past.
They have, but have you ever seen them so spectacularly wrong?
Well, they were just hoping. They were snorting a lot of copium and hoping against hope.
Right, so it's not reporting.
Well, when you build yourself up for several years, wishing and hoping and talking and looking for evidence that Putin is on the way out, you know what I mean? That and wishing against, wishing it being your highest aspiration that Putin would in some way be made to go away. Then when something like that happens, you shit your pants and think that it's Christmas and your birthday, you roll into one type thing, and then you just jump at it. I mean, we played, people don't know if they remember, but the mainstream media, particularly in America, talking about the walls closing in on Trump, him all repeating that phrase, the walls are closing in, the walls are closing in, the walls are closing in on Trump, and no walls closed in on in the context in which they were talking, at the time. That he was going to be impeached and kicked out and all that kind of stuff. Sure, he was impeached, but he wasn't kicked out, But that, I think in fact they were talking about the Mueller report. The walls are closing in on Trump because the Mueller report is going to be exposed as having done deals with the Russians and there's collusion and all that kind of stuff, and then it ended up not being the case. So, yeah, the mainstream media just have a really hard time separating what they would like to be true and what is actually true. They're as bad as the average person in the street in that respect. They're as subjective as the average person in the street. That's allowing for the fact that, or that's assuming that they're not actually engaged in deliberate propaganda, which of course they do, depending on the situation. But it's hard to separate the two when you've got personal bias and deliberate propaganda. Very often they're the same thing. Deliberate misinformation and disinformation. It's hard to differentiate from personal bias. Ultimately, it's the same. If you're particularly biased about something, if you don't like something, and you tend to look at the world or reality in a way that through that bias filter, basically. Then
Okay, tell me now what you were thinking last Saturday morning as it was happening.
That it was a joke, yeah.
Come on, no, that. But we were watching that, and we're thinking this is a pretty hot situation, no?
I didn't. In the moment I didn't know what to think, but you can go back to on my Twitter feed. Actually, I said that I think on that day I said that it was some kind of a. I can try and pull it up here if I can find it, maybe. But then,
it's not all the Wall Street Journal. Okay, this is them with their headline. May 24th, so 1 month to the day before it happened. Wagner chief Prigozhin's feud with Russian military cracks Putin's image of control. Mm-hmm. There may be some wishful thinking in the headline, but that's quite accurate. Given what just happened, no?
That it shows Putin lacks control?
well, that's as a feud to begin with. Wagner chiefs feud with Russian military. So that, what happened last week basically answered the questions we had for about 6 months before about Prigozhin and his videos and complaining about the lack of weapons, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway.
What day was it? June 24th?
Saturday, yeah, 24th.
I'll just read first tweet I wrote about it was the timing of Prigozhin's little escapade, I called it, is interesting. It happens when all the Wagner fighters are on holiday after Bakhmut. Ukrainian military is on holiday after getting decimated in their counteroffensive. And therefore the Russian military is on relative holiday too. If Prigozhin was serious about his coup attempt, he would have done it at a time when Russian forces were bogged down.
Yeah.
Instead, he chooses holiday time when it poses no threat to Russian military operations and therefore no threat to the Kremlin. All it does is provide fodder for the reality creators and wishful thinkers in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
Notice also that in all his rants, Prigozhin never once mentions Putin. The entire thing is some kind of ruse for some as yet unknown purpose.
Okay.
On the 24th. That's what I was thinking.
Okay, so you don't think he was ever in any way actually challenging Putin, then? That what he said during it and then after.
I think it was the actions.
He wanted Shoigu out.
It was the actions of a deranged person.
Yeah.
Prigozhin is deranged. So to ascribe any kind of serious intent or planning to him, or he had some grand strategy that had any chance of actually working is missing the point that the guy's obviously not right in the head.
Okay. Do you think it ends with him, or is this a Western conspiracy to get Russia?
No, well, like as you mentioned, people in the West, they were apoplectic, almost in the sense of they thought they saw for a moment, the culmination of all their hopes and dreams coming true, and they were completely unable to actually read it, for what it was. So all they could see, it's bizarre, all they could think was coup in Russia, Putin's gone, and they disregarded the evidence, what was actually happening. Or they looked at the evidence that was happening and say, yeah, but maybe we don't know enough here. You know what I mean? They'll start to be kind of circumspect about the data. In other situations, they're absolutely sure when that certainty confirms what they want to hear. But in this case, they wanted to be uncertain about what was going on because the evidence suggests that they weren't going to get what they wanted. So they said, but wait, it's not over. Maybe there's more.
Yeah.
Maybe this isn't just the actions of a nutbag. Yeah. Maybe this is like Russian society wide. Maybe it's in the military. Maybe it's let's just wait, right? So they started to be journalistic.
Yeah, on Monday.
If only to...
On Monday,
yeah.
They changed. They said, well, that was over quickly, but any day now, the walls are closing in.
Yeah.
They come from soon.
Well, even on the same day, when Prigozhin decided he was gonna go back to back home, and
he may live another day, but
it's not over yet. There could be rumblings. There'll be effects of this.
Yeah.
This could be. He could have just pulled out the brick, one brick. Yeah, it doesn't look like much, but that could be all it needs for the whole edifice to fall. So it could just wait a couple of days, wait 2 weeks to flatten the curve. You asked if there was any Western backing in it. This is Jerusalem Post, but I don't know if it's carried anywhere else. But the President Joe Biden said that the United States and his allies were not involved in the brief uprising by Russian mercenaries against the Kremlin. CIA Director William Burns called Russian spy chief Narishkin after last week's aborted mutiny in Russia to assure the Kremlin that the United States had no role in it. The New York Times and Wall Street Journal reported on Friday. So there you go.
The irony of this is, and the 10% of the population who pays any attention, they're all skeptical and critical, very well versed in official statements and what to believe or not believe. So they, of course, didn't believe that. They took the maxim that nothing is true until the official denials been issued. So they read that as okay, they're in on it. Okay.
Well, Mike Pompeo, we lie, we cheat, we steal. That's pretty much what they do at West Point.
I think it's hilarious that the US made the denial public And privately too, Burns, of course, as well. But there was also public statements to that effect. We had nothing to do with this when no Russian allegation had been made.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They all protested too much.
Yeah, it's like I know
we know that you all know that we're supposed to be kind of doing this thing. But no, we didn't.
You all know that we do this. We know, and you know, and we know that you know that we do this all the time. But in this case, in this case, it wasn't us. We had nothing to do with it.
For me, that's what's extraordinary about this.
What?
You would expect it. Like, Scott Ritter is now pretty much on point. Most people are. They figured out that this was a Wagner spat. PMC was about to be folded, and Prigozhin wanted his money-making scheme to keep going. And, you know, that was really all there was to it. Hence, farcical LARP, as you described it. But in the context of what's happening, major geopolitical, barely disguised proxy war between the United States and Russia, we would expect, if something like this happened at this juncture when the Russian military has actually got the upper hand in Ukraine, whoa, this is the NATO coming back through the side. We would expect this.
Absolutely.
So he's
in the moment,
naturally suspecting, oh, there's got to be a CIA connection here.
Yeah.
The irony is, it's more mundane than that, and therefore more mysterious. Not, this is just born in Prigozhin's head, maybe with others in Moscow who put words in his head to get him to act. But it's pretty much limited just to that.
Very few.
And that's what makes it all the more striking. It's mundane, but it happens at this time. And all it can take is one lunatic.
There's possible, if you want like kind of deeper conspiracy aspect to it, I would say it's possible. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's possible that, well, I'd say it's almost certainly true that the Russian government, that the Kremlin, that Putin, etc., all knew that this was going on, that this kind of dissent, these murmurings, and they weren't just murmurings. Like, you go back to Bakhmut and video of Prigozhin like bad-mouthing the Kremlin and Shoigu over and over again in deranged, foul-mouthed rants several months ago. So the idea that the Kremlin didn't know that there was dissent among the ranks of within Wagner, particularly Prigozhin, is not really plausible. They certainly did. And they probably had people on the ground in Wagner who were sending information back. So they probably knew that this kind of thing was in the works, you know, was being planned. Maybe they didn't know the exact timing of it, but maybe they did. Anyway, so in that sense, you could assume that they didn't step in to take any action against it because they wanted to use it it's a useful tool if you control it. You know, if you have a handle on this. On coup plotters and stuff like that, it's a useful tool to let it play out, knowing that there's no real threat, to see who gets on board. Because then you get to clean house and get rid of people who are not exactly loyal to you. Now, it's interesting that it seems anyway, and according to the official Russian government statement, there was no support for it in the military, in the regular Russian army or armed forces, and there was no support for it among the population, or very little, and no support for it among the political class. There was no one stood up, no no politician stood up and said we support, publicly said we support Wagner, we need to get rid of Putin, we need to get rid of Shoigu. No, you got no support whatsoever. Yeah. And that was certainly a part probably of Prigozhin, the crazy person that he is, suddenly realizing that in his deranged fantasies of, marching on the Kremlin and shirt fronting, as the Australians like to say, Shoigu and dragging him out of the defence ministry, in his deranged fantasies of doing that, he suddenly realised that actually that wasn't going to happen because basically no one supported him. He had no support whatsoever. And the other thing I'd say is that, in the initial moments anybody could have thought, oh, there might be something going on here because of we know that, these kind of coups have been staged quite regularly by the CIA and MI6, etc., but particularly the CIA over the years. Certainly they were directly involved. The US State Department and the CIA and other elements of the US establishment were directly involved in the Maidan coup. They made it happen. Now, you've seen so many coups like that. That's the way coups have happened in the past 20 years, let's say, in major coups that were successful. And we've got used to the coups taking that form. Of course, those coups those aren't called coups. They were called grassroots rebellions of the population to overthrow unjust political leaders, and it's faded and lauded in the Western media as a great thing. And they never say that they're an actual coup, that it's a coup by the CIA. It's a CIA State Department funded coup. So in Russia last week with Prigozhin, what you saw was how an actual attempted coup happens and how long it lasts in a major country. And that argues for it there not being any Western involved in it at all, because it was such a farce.
Yeah.
Certainly if the CIA had been putting, I don't think they're not able to, is another reason why there was definitely no Western involvement in it, is because Russia has kind of firewalled itself against, it's well versed in those kind of colour revolutions over the years, and it knows how they operate, and it's taken, over the past 20 years under Putin, it's taken all the measures necessary to make sure that that never happens in Russia. So it's not possible for the CIA to have a coup, to have a colour revolution in Russia. And also, if they did in some scenario where they were able to do that, it would look very different than what happened last week. It would be, you know how it happens.
Yeah,
with,
like
with
in Syria,
grassroots
it would
movements
start
and all that
with,
kind of stuff, or it would be armed gangs. But you need massive logistical accessibility or access to the country to be able to do that. Either directly from, like, say, the CIA or through its partners in the region. But
yeah,
like I said,
the Russians own. We've seen several reports over the years of the FSB making busts on illegal weapons making, underground weapons making factories.
Yeah. So certainly
within Russia. So that would be
but-
how they try to get it, an inroad. Have you seen the War Gonzo clip of their interview with Prigozhin? I'm not sure when it's from. I think it's March. Do you know who I'm talking about? He's that's his alias. He's a Russian Muscovite blogger / military correspondent, treated as such seriously within Russian media. He's often in Donbass, and he interviews Prigozhin. I think this might be the actual point where the idea was put in his head.
Oh, yeah.
So this is just a clip from like an hour-long interview. Hopefully there's
Боеприпасы вам не дают, потому что вы можете там пушки чуть ли не на Москву развернуть, пойти там Кремль штурмовать и так далее. Ну, такие опасения, они насколько беспочвенны?
Пойдем ли мы на Москву?
Ну, вот они говорят, ну как они, вот типа оправдывают, якобы, вот нельзя, ЧВК Вагнера, вот они достигли уже такой автономии, у Пригожина такие политические амбиции. Вот сейчас он возьмет свою, значит, эту частную армию, развернет и захватит власть в России.
Да, Семен, смотри, по поводу похода на Москву. Мысль интересная, но не думали.
Fire.
Я не предлагал.
Нет, ну да, я понимаю.
You think he's lying? That wasn't the first time you heard it.
No.
War Gonzo is saying back to him what he's hearing in Moscow,
Right, of
because
course.
others are watching Prigozhin and they know that that's
and they're
what
hearing
thinking.
that within the ranks. So of course he's going to say no in that moment, because like, shh, don't say that. It's
So
too early.
He
It's too early.
played dumb.
Yeah, they've been planning it for maybe a month or two before that, or something along those lines, But yeah, I don't know. It was a joke. The whole thing was a joke.
Yeah, it was hot though for a moment. I mean, 3,000 Chechen fighters sent to Rostov. I mean, it came to a head because of that. They surrounded Rostov, and there was some kind of firefight between Russian Air Force and this convoy going up, because there were several choppers and
They may have
a plane
launched
shot
a
down.
missile or two.
But yeah, he was cornered, I suppose, and he accepted all terms. Which,
and then
you get to live, and that's it.
Yeah, well, I don't know if he gets to live. He gets to live for now. But he immediately, when he announced that Prigozhin put out a statement, after he decided, I kind of changed my mind. I don't really want to go to Moscow. We're going back home because blah blah blah. Some noble thing about not spilling Russian blood. And then he turned around and said that actually the only reason we were in Rostov was because we, the 30th of June date, when they were going to be required to, Wagner members were going to be required to sign contracts to incorporate themselves into the Russian military. That was coming up. It was, a week later. So they had gone to Rostov since they had finished in Bakhmut and all that kind of stuff. They were on holiday, like I said. So they had gone to Rostov with their equipment in order to hand it over. In the case that when June 30th came, Wagner was disbanded in that way or incorporated into the Russian military, they were going to give all their equipment to the military base in Rostov. It was the closest major military base where they could give back all the Russian equipment, right? And that's why they were there in Rostov. That wasn't part of the coup, according to nutty Prigozhin, right? That wasn't part of his plan. That they were just doing the normal thing. They were going willingly to give up, not give up, but to follow the instructions of the Russian government. But then on that day, according to him, Russian forces attacked a Wagner position wherever it was, and that is what just, in the moment pushed him over the edge. And in that moment, on that same day, he formulated a plan to march on Moscow and started it off. See, that's how deluded the guy is. He thinks that anybody would. He's just a liar. He's a pathological liar, and he's a foul-mouthed pathological liar.
Yeah,
and he should be in prison, if not worse.
Yeah. So Putin isn't. It's not just rhetoric when he's talking about betrayal and stabbed in the back and a dangerous situation and so on. It's still a farcical LARP, but he is saying that this kind of thing is dangerous and could have caused a major.
Yeah, only to the extent that that Wagner or Prigozhin had got into the minds of, a large number of the regular Russian military and in the minds of politicians, whatever. Or he enjoyed support among them, significant support among them for this kind of thing, for his delusional rants about getting rid of Shoigu, etc., etc. I mean,
in hindsight,
remember in Iraq the highway?
How did that happen?
Remember what happened?
How did Prigozhin get into not just Russian minds, but he became an international? He got fame. Yeah. How did that happen? There was a viral documentary about Wagner's exploits that went viral also.
Made by
well
Prigozhin.
Watched in the West. They were made by he owns a media company. Media companies, plural, mostly online. They're like portals and so on.
Well.
But one of them was an actual filmmaking studio that made this documentary about Wagner. So
it's all about the money.
And then I'm wondering, that whole thing about Shoigu, Gerasimov, going on and on and on, and then it becomes fact. Everyone knows this internationally, but was this all from his head?
No,
because they were starting to.
Well, Shoigu is the one who would give the orders that maybe didn't speak directly to him, or maybe he did, but anyway, told him that he's not. Was basically constraining his plots and plans and his delusions, his grand ideas by, for example, in Bakhmut, that's what he was going on about then, about not getting ammunition. When he was lying, they had plenty of ammunition to do the job that they were given to do in Bakhmut. What he wanted was a lot more ammunition to stockpile it, so Wagner would have it for his delusional idea of staging a full ground war on the Kremlin, or driving through the walls of the Kremlin and grabbing Shoigu by the. So he's a character disturbed. I think he's a character disturbed, pathological person who takes that attitude. Who, if you say no to them, the kind of people, if you don't say no to me, if you say no to me, if you say no to a particular type of person, they get enraged, and you're for the rest of your life their number one enemy. That's the kind of person he is, I think.
Yeah, and it doesn't need a grand plot. It doesn't need the CIA.
No.
You can have one person.
Loopy person, yeah.
I wonder how far back this goes. People talk about Prigozhin being Putin's longtime friend. In quotes. Yeah. It's not a friend. Yeah. The thing is, what's weird about his story is that he pops up in 2016. He's key to 2016 in the narrative set by the West. Russia tried to influence the elections, and what it came down to in the Mueller report was specifically this Internet Research Agency, which is a bland Orwellian name for actually what was basically a marketing clickbait troll farm in St. Petersburg.
That's Prigozhin.
Prigozhin announced in February, right when he's beginning to start his public spat with the Kremlin, that he declares that that's me, that's my baby. And not only do I own that, I invented that, I created it, and I did that to push back against American propaganda. Well, Newsweek and other American outlets picked up on that and they went, Proof. Prigozhin is very close to the Kremlin, Putin. In fact, they're best friends. In fact, he was at one time his personal chef, right?
He served him a meal once.
Therefore, Putin did direct him to influence. So he gave legs to the lie that had already been discounted. When what they found, 44 offending tweets that may have tried to have political influence, and it was farcical in itself. But this guy went and gave that old 2016 Russiagate farce legs,
because it's self-promotion. That's all he is. He's just
It's crazy. it's the goddamn cook. You remember in Hunt for Red Clover? It's the
Yeah.
goddamn cook. Well, this guy, like, I wonder how smart and cunning he is in his pathology, because cooks and Putin, if anyone knows anything about Putin's history, as he has talked about in clips here and there, and that some biographers have written, the story is that Putin's grandfather was personal cook to Lenin, and that his father was at one time personal cook to Stalin. I've wondered, it's just a thought, I've wondered if Prigozhin, in his cunning, is like, how do I get in his good graces, you know?
The allegation, I haven't found anything to substantiate the idea that he's Putin's cook. That's the way it's spun in the Western media. There's a video or pictures of Prigozhin serving him some food that he's prepared, and it's like Putin's like, you know, it's kind of like, it's almost like a photo op, basically. I'm pretty sure Prigozhin would never lower himself to be Putin's cook. Pretty sure Putin would never have Prigozhin cook his meals, like as in Prigozhin's like what he's in the Kremlin from 9 to 8 or whatever Putin's eating hours are, and he's there on call for when Putin snaps his fingers. Prigozhin, I want some, you know, want a steak and fries, whatever. Get on it for me, yes, sir. So is that what we're talking about when we say? This is the level of ridiculous.
He was serving wine personally to Putin and Bush at a 2004 summit when they met
because he was
in
trying to
Moscow.
insinuate himself into position of influence and power, but he certainly wasn't. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The guy's a self-promoter, self-obsessed, self-absorbed, self-promoter.
Hasn't he been so successful? It's insane. Like, the whole world knows as fact that Shoigu is a bad man because Prigozhin wasn't getting as many billion rubles as he would like out of Kremlin contracts. And,
Yeah.
and I think he's far cuter than he's always framed.
Blame what you mean by
always
cute
cute. He's always framed it as no. The issue isn't with Putin. The issue is with Shoigu and Gerasimov. But in a Russian system, right, the vertical of power. What you're saying is really, if Shoigu won't give me the weapons, that's because Putin has told him not to give me the weapons. So he knows that, but he won't name Putin. It's also sly. It's just a snake. It's the work of a snake. What do you think then? Are you aware of this? That one of the things that were leaked in the Discord leaks, when this 21-year-old with some kind of national security clearance in the United States put all these files on. One of them is that Prigozhin had contacts with Ukraine. I'm not suggesting this led to anything, but reading it is interesting because what seems to have come out of it at the time is that what Prigozhin is alleged to have said to the Ukrainian side was discounted by the Ukrainians themselves. Basically, Prigozhin, the story is he contacted Ukrainian intelligence and to suggest a deal. You do not target Wagner forces' positions around Bakhmut, and instead I will give you targeting coordinates for regular Russian military positions. That's textbook, betrayal right there. This is the Washington Post write-up of this in May 14th. Wagner chief offered to give Russian troop locations to Ukraine. Discord leaks. Prigozhin said he would tell Ukraine's military where to attack Russian troops if they pull their own forces back from the beleaguered city of Bakhmut. If you scroll down the first couple of paragraphs, this is supposedly took place in late January. Prigozhin is supposed to have made this extraordinary offer. Apparently, this took place in the context of ongoing secret communications during the course of the war. And it was revealed, supposedly, from these Discord leaks. Well, if you go down to the very end of that article, there's quotes from Ukrainian intelligence officials. So yeah, go back up there. You're nearly there.
Just there.
Budanov. Okay. Okay, so Budanov is someone in the SBU. I think he's that crazy guy whose offices were hit in Kiev a couple of weeks ago, actually. Quote, this is a quote, so presumably it's direct from him. Yes, of course, I can confirm this information. We have nothing to hide from foreign special services. Oh, no, that's Prigozhin. Sorry, that's Prigozhin.
Yeah, but he's saying he's confirming when the US intelligence document revealed that Prigozhin had communicated with Ukrainian intelligence, Prigozhin confirms it.
Yeah, it's somewhere in there. Anyway.
No, but that's it right there. That shows you. The guy's a joke.
Yeah.
Do you want me to give you an analogy for this? You know when gypsies come to my front gate and offer me to redo my driveway, I don't take them seriously, right? Maybe Prigozhin's a gypsy, but anyway, the point being, Prigozhin there in that article he's quoted as having said, yeah, I contacted Ukrainian intelligence. It's in those leaks. Yep, I contacted. That's right. There's treason, right? He's signing his own death warrant in a certain sense.
Yeah.
But he's no problem doing it. So the same applies to whether or not this is true or not, whether or not he did contact them, don't know. But if he did, what way do you think the Ukrainian intelligence would respond to it?
They treat it cautiously, but being Ukrainian, I would have thought they would have acted on it, have tested it out.
Maybe.
What the article says that I couldn't find.
But he didn't give them any information, is the thing.
They did.
He offers to give them information and then doesn't give them information.
I can't remember where it is, and it's shite. Anyway, it's worth reading because they have a Yuki guy say, when we got this information, or we saw his offer, we were like, we didn't know what to do with it because we didn't know if we could trust him.
Of course.
Right. But in hindsight, I wonder if they're kicking themselves because like they could have used that.
They probably wouldn't have given them accurate information.
Okay, maybe not.
This is the problem in that kind of a conflict with psyops and all that kind of stuff. You literally don't know.
Cloak and dagger stuff.
You don't know reality from fantasy, and you can't trust anything.
And no one would have known, I suppose, until now everything's clear, it's out in the open, but it could only be been made clear.
The only reality in which these people ground themselves is money. You know, that's the only thing they believe. That's what's going on across the board in this entire conflict. Everybody's getting paid off. All those billions of dollars from the American and Western aid to Ukraine, most of it, or not most of it maybe, but a significant proportion of it is going into people's pockets. And they're all being paid off. And nobody trusts anybody else except if, you know, I get in on you and you're talking money and you say, listen, we can siphon off, you know, a few million from this tranche of aid to Ukraine, and we'll do it through this company. And are you are you in on it? And you're like, okay, yeah, sure. You know, thieves can trust each other when they realize that they're all on the same page in terms of thievery, but in terms of some kind of like when it comes to like strategy and stuff and passing information back and forward across front lines between two countries, it's like nobody believes that. You know what I mean? The level of trust between the Ukrainians and the Russians in terms of, you know, official channels is like less than zero. You know,
it's not zero. It's bad, but they do organize transfers of prisoners of war, for example.
Yeah,
and they take place. No one starts shooting at the other side when they happen.
Yeah.
You know, there's enough and some issues, but.
In general, in terms of strategy,
they must know when someone, I think it's described there, when Prigozhin comes forward and says like exactly the kind of thing they want to hear, they were so stunned by it, they didn't act on it because they were so suspicious of it.
Yeah, of course.
You know, and it says in that Washington Post article that he specifically requested comment from the Kremlin about this, and they just said nothing, which means the Kremlin obviously knew about the validity or not of this claim that Prigozhin had made this kind of offer.
Well, they knew enough about Prigozhin and the type of person he was.
In hindsight, it's clear like they knew they had a snake, and all of that they were waiting for him to, or helping to maneuver. You know, people were so skeptical last week. They were immediately going, like they saw, like what you're saying, that it was farcical. Okay, so it's a ruse, and they were spinning theories as to why. Oh, so Putin pretends as well. Prigozhin pretends to be a mutineer / snake in the grass, traitor, betraying.
Overthinking it, yeah.
But then Putin pretends to hit him back. I'm going to punish you. You're going to Belarus with your forces in preparation for a possible northern offensive on Kiev to be used in the future.
Yeah.
You can see why people
tell the whole world about
people
it.
could see it was a farcical LARP, so they were like, okay, so what's the real intention here? But it was simpler than that.
Mm-hmm.
It was much more mundane.
Yeah.
But still bloody dangerous, though.
Well, when you see people talking about, like, you know, this is a ruse and is a way to, like, exiling or sending Prigozhin and Wagner to Belarus is a way to set it up so that they can then, you know, start an offensive down from Belarus towards Kiev. It's like, yeah, that's a really good way to telegraph to the entire world what your plans are, you know. Do it in the context of an international media shitstorm over a coup in Russia, and in the middle of it, you know, a big part of it is mentioned that, yeah, we're moving we're moving Wagner to Belarus, and then everybody goes, yes, because the reason is you're going to move into Kiev. Yeah, that's right. Let me get on to the Washington Post and just confirm that for them, that that's what we're going to do. That's how you do. That's how you do offensives, right? You tell the entire world about it in advance.
You do a clever but dangerous incident to make it happen, rather than just make it happen. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So yeah, but Wagner was done, like, after Bakhmut, their main job. Apart from, you know, up to that point, but they were in Bakhmut for like 7 months. Last October or something like that was when they really kind of started. So 7 months in Bakhmut, and it seems to me that they served their purpose, which was to, you know, throw themselves into basically a meat grinder, albeit with, you know, a higher attrition rate against the Ukrainians than they were receiving, but still, allegedly 20,000 of them were killed in those 7 months. Probably 3-4 times that Ukrainians were killed, and it seems to me that worked as intended. That was the point, to degrade Ukrainian military manpower to the point that their much talked about, much vaunted, planned offensive, summer offensive, basically couldn't even get off the ground, which is what happened. It's what's happening right now.
Yeah.
So they, you know, 60,000-70,000 of Ukrainian, of the, you know, best, mostly the best Ukrainian military personnel were killed or injured in Bakhmut, and counteroffensive has been postponed. Our counteroffensive isn't as good as we thought it was going to be, because we don't have the manpower, because we're putting in fresh recruits who have had 2 weeks training and, you know, have learned to point and shoot, and that's about it. And they're getting wiped out. Yeah,
well, speaking of which, yeah, it's amazing how another big tell in how not a major crisis that was for Russia last week is that the SMO didn't skip a beat. Mm-hmm. The day of, the day after, here's one from 2 days after. TASS, Russian news agency, June 27th, reporting on June 26th activities along the front line. Russian forces repel 7 Ukrainian attacks just in the Donetsk part of the front line over the past day. So that was roughly 48 hours after the, oh my God, catastrophic coup. There's also, can you scroll down? There's usually a timeline on the right side of TASS. Oh, it doesn't show up on your screen. Okay. They have timelines. Anyway, if you go on TASS today, they have like July 2nd, Ukraine operations updates. And there's like 10 items, and 4 of them include the deaths of an estimated 300 to 500 people at different spots. Mm-hmm. That's like in the last day. Mm-hmm. 1,500 Ukrainians daily still just being ground out.
That's, for me, the most bizarre thing about this entire conflict is how Ukraine can continue to lose manpower at the rate they have been. You know, it varies, obviously. It's varied over the course of the past 18 months or so, but, you know, they've lost a massive amount of soldiers, and in a normal conflict, long before now, Ukraine would have sued for peace. Basically, they would have, they would have surrendered
Yeah.
on unfavourable terms. And of course, the only reason they haven't been doing that is because they're being, I don't know what iteration of the Ukrainian army this is, but it's each iteration, as each iteration of the Ukrainian military is being destroyed by the Russians, the Americans and the West send in replacements in the form of equipment, So, I mean, Ukraine had 40 million people, so what, half of those, there's probably several million, at least, let's say there's maybe 10 million, fighting age, military age males in Ukraine. And they're being pulled from, as we see in the kind of reports of the mobilization, as they call it, people being dragged off the street and stuff.
Yeah.
But obviously, that can't last forever. You know what I mean? But it's crazy the number of people that they've lost, and just carry on, keep going.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is at this point. It's probably
probably
close to 300,000, 400,000. Well, maybe not 400,000. But certainly close to 300,000 dead and injured since the beginning. Which is a massive number. Like any other country, would just like say, okay, listen, this is mad. Let's quit it.
Here's something from a different perspective. It doesn't try to calculate the absolute number that have been killed or injured, but it's a survey, a Kiev government or private poll of Ukrainians from the New Voice of Ukraine via Yahoo News. Almost 80% of Ukrainians have close relatives or friends injured or killed since February last year.
Yeah.
And if you scroll down, there's actually that's the broadest sweep, but actually there's something like 2/3 of, at the same time, 64% of Ukrainians have at least one close relative or friend who was injured, and 63% have at least one close relative or friend who died. And it's something like, maybe it's further down, I think something like half, 3 people. So if you're, I don't know, in your 50s, you've got a nephew on one side and a nephew on the other side. There's two war dead in your own, like,
close family,
nuclear family. It's crazy. Yeah, and I don't know. That's another stat. I don't know how. Does anything else compare to it? I mean, swathes of Iraq were killed or fled as refugees. It might be comparable.
Yeah,
but I don't think that many fought, either in the resistance against the United States or in the subsequent.
No, one didn't fought, but were killed as a result of violence. You know what I mean? There's been a lot less. It would be far worse if this was a kind of conventional US war. It would be far more civilians dead than there actually
It's apples
are.
and oranges. It's hard to compare
those are staggering figures given how careful the Russians have been to avoid civilian casualties. If they hadn't been that careful, then those numbers would be far higher. The percentage might be up to somewhere near 80 or 90% of the population would know someone who had been killed or injured, and it wouldn't just be military personnel, it would be civilians as well. But the number of civilian deaths is very small because the Russians have to be careful in terms of avoiding civilian casualties. Like I said, if it was the American approach to Iraq, shock and awe, blow the shit out of. And it's not just direct deaths and injuries from direct military operations, like as in being, killed in fighting or in bombings or something like that, but as a result of the destruction of vital infrastructure, like sanitary facilities and water treatment plants and all that kind of stuff, like the Americans did in Baghdad. If the Russians had given Kiev the Baghdad treatment, things would be a lot worse.
Zelensky is still obsessed with Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Obviously, he's framing that as Russians are going to do it. Russians are going to do it. Maybe that's what Lindsey Graham and Blumenthal had in mind.
Well, they said at first,
2 days before what happened in Russia, they had this extraordinary statement. They, I got it here direct from the horse's mouth. It was a bipartisan resolution. So it's not a bill, but it's kind of like a bill a statement of intent. I didn't know senators could do this, but of course, in the US nowadays, there's a gang of 8 or some senators. Not all senators are created equal, kind
Right.
of thing. So Graham and Blumenthal.
Yeah,
Note the
video,
date.
no?
It's 2 days before the thing at Kiev in Moscow. Introduced resolution to address threat of Russian tactical nukes. Key quote is the second paragraph. Graham and Blumenthal noted their resolution holds that any use of a tactical nuclear weapon by Russia, Belarus, or their proxies, or the destruction of a nuclear facility that disperses radioactive contaminants into NATO territory would be viewed as an attack on NATO itself, requiring an Article 5 response.
Mm-hmm.
It's a crazy posture because they're basically saying if a radiation cloud wafts over from Ukraine into Poland, presumably, we're going nuclear in response. We're going to nuke Moscow.
We talked about this in the last show, right? We played their video, right?
We can't have because that predates our last show.
It does?
That's post-dates, yeah.
Um,
Probably
okay.
some other mad statement they made.
No, I thought it was. Yeah, okay. Well, yeah. Well, that statement about maybe I was talking to someone else about it. That statement they made that it would trigger Article 5. Basically, Lindsey Graham said, talked about nukes in general, using a nuclear weapon on Ukraine. This would be crossing a red line, basically, blah, 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 blah. We would eviscerate the Russians, in his typical style. And then Blumenthal expanded it out to say either nukes or the destruction of a nuclear power plant, like obviously Zaporizhia. That this would put Poland directly in danger because of the nuclear fallout, right? Radiation. Yeah. But of course, if you look at like Poland's to the west of Ukraine, obviously Zaporizhia nuclear power plant is in the east of Ukraine itself, and then on the western border of Ukraine, you have Poland, and this is supposedly the country that's would be in danger in this kind of situation, and therefore that would trigger Article 5 of NATO, blah, blah, blah. But you look at the dominant winds in that region, you can look at them any day you want, and they're all blowing west to east, or from the Black Sea south to north.
Yeah.
So any nuclear radiation, however it was produced in that area of Ukraine, would primarily endanger Russian troops and Russian civilians themselves in Western Russia, southwestern Russia, and southern Russia,
Belarus,
and southeastern Russia.
Yeah. As it happened, but sure.
Southeastern Russia and southwestern Russia and yeah. Anyway, look at the map. Basically, north of Ukraine and west and east of Ukraine.
It's such a stretch, and it's crazy. I wondered. They said retrospectively that these two, along with the Gang of 8, had been briefed the days before it happened that a coup was imminent in Russia. I don't know if they're making the shit up after the fact, but I did wonder if this was connected, and that's why they were excited, in their presentation of why they were rushing this forward. Maybe not. Maybe this is kind of a separate scheme.
They were
the Zaporizhia,
they were
nuclear false flag.
So high on their own bullshit that they imagined a scenario where there was going to be a coup in Russia in the next couple of days. Putin was going to fall, and as a last effort, a Samson option,
Yes,
he would nuke Ukraine
or cause a false flag in Zaporizhia.
Yeah, and that then this was a warning to him that if you do that, it'll be even worse because then NATO will come full force after you and we will eviscerate you.
Yes, he used that term, eviscerate.
even as you're being deposed, we will invade Russia. NATO will invade Russia and take you to The Hague. So you've been notified, Putin. Look, this thing's going to get worse, everything's going to get worse. All of this is going to get worse. All we talk about every week in this show, in general terms, our main points are that everything, all major stories and all major events and the way they're reported in the Western media and the words from Western politicians' mouths are all utter horseshit and provable horseshit. It's all fantasy and nonsense. And that's all we do. We simply say this is absolute nonsense, and it's extreme nonsense. And it's hard for me even to get my head around it. And I've been looking at it for 20 years. It's hard for me to get my head around the extent of their delusion. The wheels are off as far as, in terms of anybody getting accurate information. And people are having hot takes left, right and centre and everything. And it's nonsense. It's all complete and utter nonsense. It may as well be a comedy show. It is a comedy show. In the sense that they're just talking complete nonsense. It's like a deranged clowns, babbling incoherently. They may as well just do that. They may as well just speak in tongues. Lindsey Graham and Blumenthal may as well just have spoken in tongues for all the sense that it made.
Yeah.
But people take it as serious, then the media reports it and they broadcast it out there as if it's actually true, and it's not. It's absolutely false. And that goes for almost everything these days. Almost every major topic is infused with utter bullshit, passed off as fact. So yeah, Sisyphus. It's kind of Sisyphusian. Every week we push the boulder up the hill and then it rolls back down again, because within the following week there's another deluge of bullshit that we have to push back up the hill.
Yeah. And I think the events in Russia last Saturday were another kind of bellwether of that, without any actual grand intrigue, nor serious, as it turns out, risk of Russia imploding and Russia's nuclear arsenal being under threat of being taken over by Prigozhin and blah blah blah. People analyzing it, the vast majority of them, without any media priming at all, because the media's we don't know what's happening. It's news to us. They've just lost intelligence on this. It was the wildest, craziest collection of subjectivity I've ever seen. I don't know.
It's hard because, from our perspective, most people on social media and out there in the world who are paying attention and commenting on this are coming out from the point of view of they believe that there's some truth or reality to what's actually going on in terms of events that are being reported and how the media reports it, and that they can study it and derive conclusions from it, as Karl Rove once said, judiciously, that they think they're part of the reality-based community, and they can look at these events as they transpire and then derive objective conclusions about it. The problem is most people don't understand that. Well, the perspective that we come from is that, or that I come from, speak for myself, is from a kind of more meta-analysis of the situation, and that the wheels are off this whole thing. It's going downhill. It's sliding down the slippery slope to, horseshit town, basically. It's already halfway there, and there's no fixing it, And all these people, what I see happen on social media, and basically people commenting, they're straining to kind of try and get some sense and make some sense out of it, and to draw some objective conclusions about it. And they're using information from the government and from the media to draw those conclusions. And they may kind of say that it's distorted, but here's what's actually going on. And here's, by speaking out, by telling the truth by exposing those lies, those distortions in the media, then we can fix the whole situation and fix the system. I don't think that's possible. Because the whole system is rotten to the core, basically, and it's on a particular trajectory, and there's no stopping it. And I just see these people go through this process of realizing that bit by bit. COVID was an example where a lot of people got their eyes opened to the extent of government malfeasance and dishonesty around lockdowns and vaccines and the virus and all that kind of stuff. And they just need repeated applications of that until they get to the point where they realize, actually, these people lie when they open their mouths, basically. That there's no truth to any of it, and there's something else going on. You have to take a different perspective on the whole thing, a broader perspective. Otherwise, you'll jump at any one event, particular events that happen. And maybe we'll talk about that in a minute, as an example of it. You jump at events to to try and, you know, as evidence that this is finally they've been exposed. Finally, we've exposed the you know, one particular lie that's a big enough lie that we can call them to account, and then the system can be corrected or fixed. They'll stop lying, basically, you know. But these people are, it's a state of collective institutionalized delusion that is self-perpetuating at this point, and there's no changing it.
Yeah, yeah. The analogy people ought to have is, imagine your government's run by a whole
Clowns.
bunch of Prigozhins,
Yeah.
and
They're
they're
into
actively doing all they can to keep Putin out.
Yeah.
It's the reverse. So you will naturally misread what happened in Russia last week was actually a successful defense against the penetration of a psychopath, which made Putin and therefore Russia stronger. And they took the complete opposite take home from that. Russia's weaker as a result of this, because you will interpret it through the lens that you're used to, which is actually a government effectively run by or held hostage to the greed and manipulations of psychopaths, doing all their utmost to keep out that one decent man or woman who might come in and try to fix it. Hence Russiagate, Trump, Khan in Pakistan, you name it, Corbyn in Britain, he's reasonably good, right? And the same for the so-called evil populists in training people to hate. That's a system run by psychopaths in training you to hate the one person trying to come in to actually course correct.
Right.
So you can still see why they invested in it. People do try to vote. They try to activate. They're activating and agitating now for RFK Jr. and the Democrats side over the United States. They still are invested in it because they're trying to get the one good man to come in.
Right, to fix it, yeah.
But the system is so rigged against them that, you know, God help you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you understand why people are doing it, but you're like, you've seen this 100 times before, and the outcome of every single attempt in the West anyway is utter failure. And in fact, it's what the result always is that the regime gets stronger.
Yeah. People believe
Pathocratic one.
People believe the mythos. You know, this goes back to 9/11, let's say. It goes back longer than that, obviously, but let's say 9/11, freedom and democracy, spreading freedom and democracy around the world, fighting terrorism. Right? People believe that. However cynical a lot of people were about that, they still believe that somewhere in the system there was something actually was being honest when it said it was about freedom and democracy and fighting terrorism and protecting the homeland. All of these noble ideas. So all of these, behind it, if you stop for a second and accept, just as a mental exercise, accept the idea that all of the major players in this drama, particularly in the West, are all motivated by one thing, which is money and personal power. And personal power is a means to money. So it's ultimately money. That's all they're interested in. And everything they say that isn't that. They never say that, obviously. So everything they say is not that. It's something else. It's obviously they understand. They're smart enough to realize that they have to cover that up, and in fact project the opposite idea, which is that I'm a public servant, I'm here to help the people, I'm trying to preserve freedom and democracy, I'm trying to stop bad people from doing bad things, etc., etc., etc. That's all just talk, completely hollow and meaningless. They're meaningless platitudes, basically. They don't care about that at all. So when they act from the perspective of gaining personal power and the end result of it, which is money and personal enrichment. So that's going to cause, they're going to increasingly appear to be doing exactly the opposite of what they say they want to do, because their prime motivation is personal interest, which stands in direct opposition to public interest or serving the public or being a public servant. And it's people grappling with that contradiction, let's say, or the friction or the tension between those two things, what they say and what they actually do, and trying to figure it out, and not wanting to believe that these people are actually only absolutely entirely motivated by personal interest and power and wealth. They don't want to believe that, because then we're screwed, right? The whole system has to be taken down. It has to be wiped away. The experiment has to be wiped from the petri dish and started again, and nobody wants to believe that. So they still hold on to the idea that no, maybe they are actually trying to do this at least a little bit. There's some good people, or there's some good in some of these people, and and maybe they just make mistakes, you know, and you know the mental gymnastics you have to get into to try and find the bit of good in a person who's fundamentally rotten, and how you delude yourself, and how that then twists your own ability to actually see what's actually going on, and you start doing these hot takes and different things, and you just mess it up. You have no ability to read reality correctly. Are you increasingly diminish your ability to read reality correctly? And then you put that out on social media, and other people agree with you or disagree with you coming from their perspective, and it's just a big shit show.
Yeah, like the next major topic, the riots in France this week.
Yeah.
Hot takes, you know,
All over the place.
France is falling.
France is falling.
Europe is falling, has fallen.
I saw
and dusted.
quotes like all major cities in France are burning.
Yeah.
Like, and that implies all of the major cities, let's say, I don't know, was that 5 or 10, 5, 6, 7 major cities, and all of those cities are burning. So the entire city, like, so for example, Paris has 11 million people. Does that include the outskirts? I don't know. In terms of the metropolitan area, it's 11 million people. So is that are all the 11 million people also burning with all of Paris? Or Lyon with 4 million, all 4 million and all of Lyon? I mean, you know, words matter, you know, when you say something like that. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, so when someone tweets something like that or writes something like that, it's entirely false. I'm not even going to say, I would take away any credit to them that they're actually referring to an actual situation that's happening. Because you exaggerated it so much, I'm going to say that what you said is 100% false. No major cities in France are burning. None. How's that for a headline? None. There are no major cities on fire in France. On fire? What does on fire mean? You know, so that kind of bullshit just... And people... But I understand why people are coming at it from that perspective. And people who, you know, I kind of, to some extent, respect and, you know, think that they have sometimes at least have a good take on things, they still come out with that bullshit because it confirms, because they have this sense that, you know, because they'll be on the same side as us, let's say, where they see the corruption and evil in the West and what it's doing to the world, it has been doing for the world for a long time. And you know, and by the West you include obviously America, Western Europe and stuff, and anything you see, any troubles you see those countries having, you kind of like get a bit excited and think, finally, they're getting their comeuppance, you know? The evildoers in Western countries are getting their comeuppance, you know, their societies are collapsing, this is your own fault, and you'll gloat a little bit over the fall, you know? So I can understand where they're coming from, but they're just, I mean, that'll happen by itself on its own time. There's no point in jumping the gun and claiming that it's happening right now. Because then, like, do you actually care what's happening right now? I mean, something is happening in France right now, but do people actually care about it? Or is it more about just sounding off on social media and saying, yeah, I knew this was going to happen one day. Take that, France. I hate Macron.
Yeah.
Next.
Like the initial takes were like, the French people are rising up against the WEF.
Right, yeah.
And Rothschild puppet, Macron.
Yeah. Klaus Schwab is on the guillotine already and stuff, yeah.
So, well, the French Ministry of the Interior's stats as of yesterday, 5 nights of rioting in 45,000 police deployed, including, quote, special forces, 2,500 people arrested, an unknown number in total, hundreds of policemen injured, 2,500 street fires, which includes 1,350 torched vehicles, 234 fires to public property, and all told on national, municipal and gendarmerie attacks, about 50 attacks against police stations and barracks. That's not nothing. It's interesting.
No.
But I suppose being here, we've seen this before. This has happened in France before. Like, rioting now is so common that no one has mentioned that just 2 months ago, there were mass demonstrations in France. There were 10 general strikes in March over pension reform. And that was largely union-led, so it was largely more in the peaceful protest spectrum of things. But there were rioting too.
People getting their heads bloodied by cops, which is part of the course.
Police, yeah. I mean, and I've seen some people confuse footage, like of crowds running away from gendarmes firing tear gas at crowds. That actually took place in April with events this week. And it all gets jumbled up, you know. This is not the same thing as the Yellow Vest rebellion, if you can call that a rebellion at all, because that emerged genuinely grassroots. It tended to come in smaller towns in the countryside. This has come from a few places,
but
in the major cities.
Suburbs of the major cities, or the
and
inner cities.
It's very like, you know, what happened in the US when George Floyd died under police arrest, and there was outrage and mayhem. And at the time, same thing. The hyperbole was like, all the cities are burning. There was a lot. It was a big issue. There were a lot of riots in a lot of parts of a lot of cities, but it wasn't like the US is falling.
All of America is on fire.
Comparably, we found one 2005. There were riots that lasted. There was a state of emergency declared. That had not yet happened here under Chirac. So what, 2005, 18 years ago, a long hot summer. Because in that case, police had they were answering a break-in, and a bunch of kids nearby were afraid the police were going to come and start interrogating them. So they ran away from them. And I don't think they were actually chased. That's still unknown. It's unclear whether the police had actually chased them. But these kids jumped into a transformer, a substation, and two of them got electrocuted, and it caused a blackout. And then there was outrage. The police did this to our boys, and the mostly Muslim minority populations in some suburbs of major cities, beginning in Paris where it happened, started rioting. And there's similar stats, a number of arrests, how long it lasted, street fires and so on. It's similar in scale. That happened, 18 years ago.
Yeah.
So it came and went, and the sun still shone, and things got relatively peaceful again. The thing is, in this time,
it's a different time. 2005, right?
One of these things, they are happening faster and faster. Like I said, we've just had back-to-back issues, although they're apples and oranges, that cause pressure on the government and the police, and they act in general more and more aggressively because they're getting attacked from all quarters now. Look at the basic different routes between the three things. 2018, Yellow Vest, largely rural, largely poorer, largely French white uprising. Pension reform, protests / riots, largely cities, but more Macron's electorate. They're his people, in quotes. More middle class. We don't want to retire. We're pushing back against the government. They're going too far. Macron says, no, I'm pushing this through. And he declares by decree that he's going to change the age of retirement. And now this latest one is urban working class wouldn't vote for Macron, wouldn't vote at all. Pretty much they consider themselves rejected by the system. They're forgotten. This third group was dead quiet all the way through Yellow Vest.
Right.
They didn't participate. They were like, this isn't our fight. This is a French.
Yeah.
We're not French. They are French, but they're caught in between. They're 3 and 4 generations back. They were the sons of and grandkids of migrants as a result, mainly of France's colonial past. But they're French. But they were dead quiet through all the other crises that came just before this. And this is just another section of the population going mental.
Yeah. And the thing that provokes them is when one of them they're mistreated by the police in one way or another. That's when they really do this kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a different dynamic, yeah. I mean, the Yellow Vests there were 11 deaths, but some of them were run over by other civilians, but others were killed by the police.
Maimed by flashbangs and stuff.
They died as a result of police brutality.
You didn't have them.
Many hundreds lost arms and eyes
and
during that, and there was no there was then that
no mass rioting.
Well, it did perpetuate probably.
Kept the protests going, but they were organised protest type thing. There was no mass rioting and burning down buildings. There was no turning on the country itself.
There was briefly.
Yeah, but not to the same extent, and not in the same way that it seems to happen with these people, where they burn cars, burn buildings,
and
loot stores. That wasn't a hallmark of the Yellow Vest protest, because they had an actual grievances, a list of grievances that were political about the way the country was being run. They weren't not going to burn down their own towns or their own sections of their own cities and destroy them. The group that has been engaging in the riots, or the demographic that has been engaging in these riots over the past 4 or 5 days, seem to express their resentment in that way, or seem to identify, or seem to express the nature of their complaints, or convey the nature of their complaints by burning buildings, looting buildings, and setting fire to things. They want to destroy. Well, they don't have an ideology, is the thing. I see a lot of people, hot takes on this from the UK and from the US and stuff, is that this is radical Islam. People have no idea. A lot of people think that this is actually immigrants. These are immigrants coming from Muslim countries, and amongst them, of course, are radical Islamist or ISIS types, and that this is basically ISIS that's doing this, right? This is ISIS who's burning buildings in France.
They see the footage, and in their head, the soundtrack is Allahu Akbar.
Yes. And they hear that now and again, but that's not what's going on.
These kids don't go to mosques.
No, they don't go to mosque, and they certainly wouldn't cite radical Islam as their as an explanation for their behaviour. They're at the same time. There's a similarity between the so-called ideology of radical Islam and ISIS and stuff like that, which is to destroy Western society, right? That it's they're
to burn it all down.
Yeah,
it's kind of an anarchist thing.
That they're heathens, basically. That they're godless Westerners, and they need to be all burned at the stake type thing, and their cities need to be burned to the ground. Of course, you can see how people make that connection. But generally speaking, looting and burning cars, burning buildings, looting. It's just chaos. It's just anarchy. It's just, and particularly young people on the streets.
For a laugh.
And it is fueled by social media. They put up the videos on social media, and they're all laughing when they're doing it. They're all having a good time, right? So it's like they bring other people, that gets other people out into the streets, and it swells the numbers and stuff, But as to the actual people who are doing this, they're French citizens, although they're all of either primarily Algerian or Moroccan descent, and some other African, former French colonial African origin, but the vast majority of them are all French citizens. Most of them have actually were born in France. Some of them, it was their grandparents who came to France. And what's their beef? Their beef is, well, it's snowflakery. It's not. Again, I could just leave it at just chaos. At young people with no direction, no outlet, no guidance, no proper parenting, and this is once they get the word to go out, and it's like a free for all to go and wreck and loot, then they do it. You know how many people in Ferguson or in any of the cities or any of the protests, the Black Lives Matter protests, or the protests in America by black people, Black Americans, particularly black youths, what would they actually, when they're looting shops, what's their grievance? You could go up and interview one of them. So tell me, how does looting this shop or burning this building, how is that going to further your cause, the cause that you're fighting for? And he's like, cause? What cause? I don't have a cause. I'm here just to loot. You know what I mean? That was what grievance was being addressed or redressed by that kind of violence in cities, in inner cities in America by black youths. They're simply expressing anger, supposedly, and say, okay, a lot of them would have anger over, who was it, brown somebody Brown was the first guy in Ferguson, or,
Yeah.
or George Floyd, whatever. They identify with Mike Brown, or they identify with George Floyd, and they see it as well. Sometimes I got like bad manners from a cop one time, or I got stopped too many times by cops, or cops tend to kind of like come up to me and search my bag too often, or they, whatever,
Well,
they give me a hard time. And I'm going to take that out on.
In the United States, it's a lot more evolved than that. They, if you go up to them and ask, they will actually have ready-made slogans ready. It's systemic racism.
I'm not interested in slogans.
It's perpetuating the colonial injustice against our people who were brought here as slaves. They have all that to hand because it's been so.
But that's Black Lives Matter protest, peaceful protest. You can do that if you want, and then you can ask those people, or you can argue back and forth about whether their arguments are valid, if there's any validity to the idea of institutional racism and all that kind of stuff and blah blah. But when it gets to burning and looting, what does that achieve? You know what I mean? Is that tied to your ideology, or tied to your grievance, tied to your are you?
Well, it's hard to separate. Like just taking down statues, was that a political statement, or was that a destructive statement in itself?
Well, targeting one statue can still be tied to your ideologies and your beliefs, however wrong they might be, or however. But when you're simply going randomly burning cars and looting buildings and burning buildings, that's all you're doing. You don't have an ideology, and you can't claim to have an ideology, because people who have an actual coherent belief or a set of injustices that they claim are true, and that they are being discriminated against. People who have that, they tend to just march. They sign petitions. They try to do it through the political process, because they realise that the problem, let's say from their perspective, is in government or whatever. So we need to change the way government functions, and change the laws that are passed, or we need to whatever, all the different ways that you try to change that situation, or that institutional racism that you claim exists within the country. You're certainly not going to change it by burning a building down, unless it's Capitol, unless it's Congress. Maybe you do it then. But they don't do that. They just burn shops and burn cars and shoot weapons and stuff, and that doesn't. So the people who do that, I discount them as having any meaningful axe to grind, let's say, or any having any meaningful role to play in society, let's say, because they're not even playing the meaningful role they could have, which is go and get a job and be a citizen. You know what I mean? Rather than being out.
At that point, a liberal steps in and says, "Hang on there, Joe. They can't just go and get a job because they don't have the same opportunities. They didn't have the same education. They didn't have the same."
Those are just statements that are unsubstantiated.
But that's like uniform in France, as in the US. That's when they'll step in to project onto the entire self-identity of, we don't fit into this society because we're oppressed people. But you see, no, you can't just say that about them. Why don't you just lift yourself up by the bootstraps and go and get an education or get a job?
Yeah. Well, some people aren't smart enough to get an education,
and so
maybe they're the ones who are looting.
They didn't budge. There wasn't a peep from them. The whole of lockdowns.
No.
The whole of forced vaccinations.
No.
Probably because they just ignored that. Because they still had the handouts.
Yeah. It was easier for them, yeah. They were getting
Nothing changed
free money,
substantially. Yeah. For most other people, working people, they were like, okay, this has radically changed. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with it. They felt the psychological terror of the situation. There was no pressure that built up in the suburban areas where they live.
No.
And, it was just waiting to boil over. Now, that argument has been used in the United States case, because the George Floyd thing came right on the heels of the end of the first lockdown, which happened more or less uniformly in most states, as it did in other places. So you can see why that tangentially makes a sense. They too, in fact, being poor, they felt the effects of lockdown worse than the middle class people had a decent home to hang out in. They could Zoom and stuff with their computers with their friends. But the poor people, they really felt the pinch of And then, of course, immediately after that, prices started rising, inflation. So once they felt
it played a part. I think it played a part, but I think the George Floyd protests would have happened anyway, regardless of lockdown or not lockdown. What happened? Because you notice, like in France, I think in the last year, there's been 33 people or whatever have been shot by cops. Most of them,
I think it's 13, but
not killed, shot. But
Okay.
13, okay, so 13 killed. But it seems, and none of them provoked this reaction. So, and the same with George Floyd. There's a lot of people who like got similar treatment to George Floyd at the hands of cops. And
but here there's a video.
It's the video, and it's the way in which it happens. You know, it's the there's various different elements. You know, but generally speaking, video and just the feel of it, if you know what I mean, the story around it, or what the story tells to people, you know what I mean. In another situation, if it's like, you know, I don't know, there was another one where a girl was in France where two girls had got into a car with a guy after a nightclub, whatever. He was giving them a lift home, and he ran through two police checkpoints or stops because he had no license, and one of the cops fired into the car and hit one of the girls and killed one of the girls, and all three of them were from Algerian descent, right? So that demographic, but you never heard about it. And there are other situations like that, similar situations, but that's too messy. It's too like, well, what was actually going on there, and you know, how close was the cop? But this video, and of course there probably wasn't video of it, but this video of the cop, like, you know, shooting him kind of point blank range right there. He was 17. There's various different boxes that have to be ticked to say yes, 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 and then okay, that activates the riot response.
Yeah,
it's weird, but so it's not consistent. But anyway, and I don't buy the whole discrimination thing in the same way I don't buy the Black Lives Matter and the, you know, institutionalized racism and all that kind of stuff in America. I don't buy the same. I don't in the same way I don't buy the claims that the demographic in France of, you know, say there's about somewhere between 10-12% of French citizens are of Moroccan or Algerian descent.
They're not Palestinians living under conditions that could justifiably be described as apartheid.
No, and
the law specifically state you're a second-class citizen.
And the majority of them are born in France, speak French fluently, obviously. They have that connection back to Algeria or Morocco, and they might go there on holidays, whatever, and they have the cultural background of, you know, they're being Muslim and et cetera, et cetera. But they're French. And they're not discriminated against in any institutional way. Like when someone says there's institutional racism, the first question, the first thing I say to that is, I want the person to tell me or show me how we're on the laws of the country that institutional racism is kind of mandated. You know, evidence where it's not that it would be called institutional racism, but that there are laws that are discriminatory against ethnic minorities in the country. Show me the law first, because if you say institutional, you mean institutions of the state, right? So you mean government laws. They have to be on the books. Show me the books. If they're not there, then that argument goes. You can't substantiate that. Maybe then you go to what amongst the population, that there's a racism within people.
Again, it's more evolved in the United States. That's why there was ever since the 60s really, but in the last 20 years has come to the fore, such that you now read it en passant, stated matter-of-factly in a regular news report, where before it was a crazy idea on the fringes of academia, which is, but you see, Joe, this is where the liberal steps in and does some explaining to you. He says, yes, it's not on the books, but there's unconscious biases. This all happens in the back of your brain, and you don't see that it's actually coming out of you. And they've created this climate in which it is perpetuating the expressions of the worst in people who, it's giving them the rationale. It's explaining on their behalf a rationale for why they loot and burn and don't want to actually be contributing to their own country.
Don't be responsible citizens. Yeah. So bottom line is, I don't think it's a case. I think the vast majority of people of Algerian and Moroccan descent in France don't have any legitimate grievances. And if they maintain that an animosity towards France and towards the French people and towards the French government, etc., for those reasons, claiming that they're discriminated against or that we're not welcome in France, whatever, then they should leave.
Leave to where?
Wherever. Go back to the bled. Go back to
right.
Go back to the Maghreb.
If it's so good, it's kind of if it's so good over there, why don't you go live there?
Well, no, they wouldn't say it's good over there, and that's, in fact, they're much better off in France than they would be if they were living back at home, probably. And that's why most of them don't go there. So, yeah, I just don't think there's any justification for it, and I think it's got to do with something else. I think there's something else. I think it's. I'll tell you what, Macron said it.
Yeah, I have it. Joe Scotty's going to put it up in a second. Comment there and. A comment section. Zidane the goat, maybe he's French, says they just hate the country France for no reason. You're right, because you can't get a solid cohesive argument out of them as to why they hate it. They do act like they hate it, and there's no ideology that they cite. Well, so you can't get a reason for, but they do act like they hate the country.
Well, you can hate it for colonial reasons. You know what I mean? Ideological colonial. Like, I don't like the English. I'll just leave it there. No, I know it's not
okay,
that I don't like the English. I say that, but it's a silly statement to say, obviously, because I do like English people. I know I have friends who are English, and I do like them. So I have to talk in generalities, and then I have to talk about the English mentality, let's say, and then I have to go back into history to show examples of how that English mentality, as I describe it, led to this arrogance and imperialism and subjugation of other people and, abuse of other people. But for me to kind of take that from, dig that out of history, bring it forward to today, pretend it's still real today, and then to use any opportunity to start attacking, basically burning and looting the country. England, for example, say I moved to England. If I moved to England, right, as an Irish person, I moved to England and then started going on about institutional racism of English people against Irish people. And it goes way back. There's 800 years of history there, and all the abuses and the colonial abuses, and it's still in the minds of English people where they make jokes about Irish people in England, and that at any moment where I look at the news every day and I look for any example of any Irish person being abused anywhere in England, and then I get people together and we all go and burn Sheffield or something. If I had such a problem with England, I simply wouldn't live there. I'd go back to Ireland, or I'd go somewhere else. You know?
Yeah.
And I'd have to be crazy to make that the focus of my life anyway. Where I get so worked up about it, to redressing historical grievances, that I'm going to create, to whatever extent, contribute to creating chaos in the country today. And not only that, but in the case of these people, burning my own local shops or the cars of my neighbours. It's just stupid, obviously.
You mentioned Macron's statement.
Yeah, put it up there.
This is from 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Emmanuel Macron blames imported US ideas for French society becoming radicalized. It's short. Let's go down and read it.
Read the subheadline. Whatever.
No, that's just a summary of it. It's worth reading in full, though. So he laments that French society is becoming radicalized. I see that our society is becoming progressively radicalized, he told Elle magazine in an interview. He took aim in particular at the idea of intersectionality, popular among left-leaning US academics that seeks to explain discrimination and poverty by examining the role played by race, blah, 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 blah. And because these are all factors that affect life chances. Again, that's what I was talking about earlier. Like, but it may not be on the books, but Macron said the logic of intersectionality fractures everything. I stand for universalism. I don't agree with a fight that reduces everyone to their identity or their particularity. Okay. Scroll down and see if there's anything more he said. Okay. there's no other quote from him. Oh, wait. Yeah, I'm in favor of dressing properly at school for girls as well as boys. Everything that is a marker of identity or a desire to shock or stand out shouldn't be at school. Okay. That was Macron. It was one of his ministers. Okay. Go back up there. Do you notice his response to his rejection, which is sound, definitely, and he's correctly identifying that as coming from the United States, along, by the way, with everything else, like the LGBT thing. That's why I call it a foreign ideology. It came from America, but it's presenting itself as universally, obviously, de facto, true on the face of it. He says in response, I don't like this new thing, intersectionality, because it fractures everything. I stand for universalism. The problem is, this isn't the solution either. This is a 60-year-old problem or more in France. And it is on a par, on scale, because it's about roughly 13% of the French population is either North African Muslim or North African Black or Black African descent. So it's a large minority, right? Universalism, what do you mean by that? Well, that's a reference to the way we've been managing the integration of these people who basically came as a result of colonialism, especially after World War II, when we needed them. We invited them over here to work. And then we let them bring their families too, and there was a form of chain migration which took off in France in the late 70s, okay? That's how you ended up with such a large number today. So these aren't obviously the new migrants. These are long-term people who've been there. And their grandparents, the first comers, did integrate. Maybe they were mosque for them, but they weren't at all radical. But 9/11 started to change that. You actually ironically went from a generation of secular French Muslims of Maghrebian descent who they were already secularized, but they were re-radicalized by 9/11 and the War on Terror. Partly because in the end, the result is actually not. There's a few of them, obviously, that are jihadis. They were implicated in, stabbings and specific atrocities that have happened, but they're still only a minority. And then they are true when they get in prison. In French prison, they're more likely to be radicalized there. But for the most part, it's not so much that 9/11 made them go radical, but the French government after 9/11 began to legislate because against the hijab. The girls were not to wear it in school. And to make it universalism, the cross was all, you could not display any sign of a cross either.
Religious.
Right. But blanking all of it out. No one, if you don't get to wear the hijab, and then therefore you can't display that you're a Christian. There. Problem solved. Did that help? No, it fucking didn't help. It had the opposite effect, because you can't get a secular Muslim. You can, kind of. You can get a much more toned down, fairly reliably able to integrate and be at peace with and harmony with the rest of society.
Yeah.
Muslim. But it was what was going on with 9/11 and the terror attacks and the wars in Syria and Libya was having an effect on them. It was, and then the pressures they were feeling at home. Okay, we're marked out as being different. We were doing okay there, integrating. It was going somewhere, and now it's definitely going the other direction.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying the kids thought of all this and are ideologically coming up with a coherent response to it. They're caught in no man's land. If you look at them, they're actually the product of several waves of ideological exports from the United States. One of them is hip-hop gang culture that is cool in itself just to be a street urchin, okay? The other one is, the whole identity politics, that it's much more important that I'm part of my tribe, and they respond as a tribe whenever one of us is attacked in diverse cities. It's so tribal in nature. There were riots this week overseas in French Martinique or somewhere, and there's no Muslims there. I was a black person there going, I've identified with. Yeah. So.
Yeah, the war on terror, the whole American war on terror was a big, like you said, was a big aspect of that war, and the effects of the war on terror and the resulting terror attacks on European soil, and particularly quite a few in France, pretty brutal attacks. and jihadi spreading this idea of the caliphate, and it encouraged then the idea of people that were susceptible to it, the idea that they're separate, that they're a separate identity in France, and that they're not only that, but they're not exactly well disposed towards the French and French culture and French society, right? It had a vague, let's say, or a kind of a subtle effect on the population. Not on everybody, because most people of that descent in France are sensible people, but you know what I mean? There's so many different factors to it, like you're saying, to that ideological priming and programming of a population to be separate and be identical. I mean, look at what's happening in America, like we talked about already, the way the separation between some black Americans and the rest of America. It's no surprise that it's happening. The same thing is happening in France. You know what I mean? Because of the demographic situation, the demographic setup of France, it's ripe for it. There's other countries that surprisingly it could happen in as well, like Germany as well. It could happen, but
yes, and they're all Western countries.
Right.
Russia has a 13% minority Muslim.
Right.
It doesn't happen there.
Right.
Contrast this. Last week was the second largest holiday in the calendar for Eid. Eid al-Fitr, Eid al-Assad, or something like that. Anyway.
Eid Mubarak.
Eid Mubarak. Putin makes a point of going to a Muslim-majority region, Dagestan, of joining the festivities locally. He's saying all of Russia sees it. He wants them to see that he's part of it. The local mufti or chief imam gives him solemn ceremony, gives him a book. It's a historic copy of their Quran, local Quran or something. And Putin gives a speech, how I would cherish this and I would take this back and I will put it in the Kremlin on display next to the Orthodox icons, to show that there's social and religious harmony between our people. On the same day, to mark the event in Sweden, with the press there, the press were brought in, make sure you film this, with the police cordon, police line, ticker tape around him to make sure that it would show that it was legally sanctioned, that no one was to be allowed to stop or interfere with what he was doing. A Swedish man burned a copy of the Quran.
Right.
And I don't know how that happened, but Stoltenberg is apparently now a spokesman for Sweden or the European Union because he gives a statement about it as head of NATO. And he says, well, Stoltenberg's still to find. Well, he still managed to get a coherent defense of it out. He says, well, in the West, in Europe, you have freedom of expression. And this is illegal. This is legal. It is because we are sovereign types of people. And dude, you're not going to produce the outcome you think you are. That everyone can just get along. I get to burn the Quran, you get to...
Everybody can burn each other's religious books. Yeah.
It's almost willfully destructive, what he did. And you just contrast the two treatments of this. So there's a French commentator called Arnaud Bertrand. He's an expat in China. He's got a big following because he just comparisons of East-West and how things get along. And he's like, another country that has a 13% minority, Muslim minority, is Singapore. They have on the books laws, a kind of a affirmative action type laws that the Kennedys tried to set up in the United States for social harmony between blacks and whites, where, it began a process that took a generation where there was no more rioting or inter-religious street battles, to the point where today there's harmony, and whenever there's a Muslim holiday, it's a holiday for everyone. The whole country recognized because... And he was basically saying, why can't we have this in France? Just institute it. He was kind of like, he's one of our activists who wishes to correct course. He sees the logical step that should be done to fix the problem. But the problem is so... Macron just gave a clue as to why the problem can't be fixed, I think. If Macron was speaking in the way that Putin does, where he wears his Christianity on his sleeve. He wants you to see that he's a practicing, even if whether he is or believes or not, is irrelevant. He wants to be seen as an Orthodox Christian, but not therefore as an extremist. But
that he values religious beliefs.
That in general,
beliefs.
Then he can appreciate that of others. Macron defended against the ideological onslaught by reverting to universalism, secular
Secular monism.
That's totally the wrong thing. The only way you could have harmony in Europe between countries with large minorities that are not going to drop, even though those kids are not practicing, they're not saying we're Muslim. The thing is, culturally, they are. That's in the back of their minds, that's what they can't get out of. They insist they're not French and they hate the country, but they're born here. They're French. But they're not allowed to freely grow and love and express both. That they're French.
Because they're separate.
And that they have Muslim origin.
Yeah, because
they're told over and over again, all is secular. Wipe all religion from your mind. We'll just do a mind wipe and it'll be gone. But it doesn't work. You would need a leader to say, Europe, a bit like Orban. He again, whether he's a believer or not, he keeps citing again Europe's traditional roots. They are Christian. It doesn't mean that we're all going, extremists against. We're not about to start the Crusades again.
Right.
But if we acknowledge what we are and stop pretending we're universal and secular and by implication better than the entire rest of the world, who's all backwards with the traditional stuff, then a French leader coming from that position can say to the Muslim, I recognize the value of what you have, and vice versa, and we can start to live harmoniously. There can be a mosque here, and down the end of the street, there can be a cathedral where people are back actually visiting and going to mass in. There's no reason why the two can't be on the same street and there should be projectiles being flung at each other. But that's what's happening as a result of their good intentions to universally just wipe the slate clean and turn it all secular.
It's a misreading of basic human psychology and the psychology or the psychological makeup of the people in the country, and the value of religious beliefs or some kind of spiritual or religious beliefs. And you have a history, you have a tradition, Christian tradition, Islam, Muslim, and Jewish, etc., Hindu, whatever. And they've survived that long not for no reason, right? I mean, it's like it's a part of people's psychological makeup, basically. The need for some kind of belief in the transcendent. And if you try and get rid of that, well, yeah, not only are you going to impoverish society, but you're going to, and people who have more hardcore religious beliefs or more attached to their religion, you're going to get a lot of pushback. You're not going to be. So it's a massive misreading of it, and almost deliberate. Is it willful, deliberate misreading of the situation in the sense that they're not misreading it, they're doing it because, or are they just deluded? Who knows? But yeah, France is difficult in the sense, like I said, those attacks, the kind of the Bataclan, the Charlie Hebdo, the ISIS, so-called ISIS attacks. Again, at the time we concluded that they were probably not what they seemed to be, but anyway, what the effect they had was to, at least in a lot of French people's minds, and especially the ones who buy Macron's secular thesis, that Islam is just not compatible with any civilized society. So you can't, so they would back Macron in his secular ideas, that France should be a secular country. So that had made it more difficult, let's say, for some kind of a religiously pluralistic society that was supported and validated by the state,
Yeah.
I mean, in the immediate aftermath, it was very, very hard for any. Of course, they said it. Islam is a religion of peace, blah blah blah. But they had to say that because so many people were thinking the opposite.
Yeah.
Because of those traumas, and it wasn't just in France. It was in Spain, in the UK, and in various other European countries. Well, that was going on. It was a period of time when they hit it pretty hard, and. Yeah, so it suggests, again, we'd have to get into a sort of different topic, but, who's actually behind those kind of attacks and what their motivation is kind of speaks to what I was saying earlier on about how it's not really the problem isn't really soluble when you realise the forces involved in directing society down this slippery slope, but, yeah. So, well, I mean, you talk about, I don't know, do you want to put this up? Here's... what we didn't mention was there's a law. It was a law passed in 2017, which kind of I think, I mean, the reasons for it were, cops were being attacked, whatever, and it passed along 2017 that broadened the situations where French cops could shoot someone. There were various different 5 categories, I think, or 5 situations where they could do it, and it was expanded their ability to legally shoot a citizen or criminal, whoever, were expanded in 2017. And I think there was a specific event that provoked that, but I think it was also in the context of, because in 2017, so it was just a couple of years after the Bataclan and Charlie Hebdo and stuff, those attacks by quote unquote ISIS in France. So this is what we didn't mention was about the actual shooting that gave rise to these protests of this guy called Niall M is a surname. This is him. Just play it there. This is him a couple of days beforehand, I think.
What's he doing?
That's like gone, It's the gangster, kind of like ghetto gangster rap thing that you were talking about earlier on, basically.
Yeah,
but it's like a gun. And then, so there's a lot of kids like him. He was known to police. He had, been run around quite a lot in cars. I don't know if he had stolen cars or whatever, but he was engaged in antisocial behaviour. And in this situation, he was stopped for the umpteenth time driving a car without a license. He has no license, and so the cop decided that he was a threat to. Use that kind of like expanded definition, that he was a threat to either the police or maybe someone else, because he was taking off at high speed and he could have been a danger to the public, so then you get to shoot them. So you have to be realistic about the demographic. These young people of Algerian, Moroccan descent, living in France, born in France, living in France as French, but engaged in antisocial behaviour a lot, coming across cops a lot. A lot of them going to end up with some kind of criminal convictions at some point. So it's, that's just to point out that it wasn't this young, law-abiding, peaceful 17-year-old who was simply driving his car along and the cop just shot him. You know what I mean? The same as, the whole George Floyd thing. Was George Floyd, context, right? Was George Floyd just a guy going about his business, and, cops had no reason. They just targeted him for racial discrimination, for reasons of racial discrimination, just targeted him and wanted to shoot him, so they shot him. That's the way people react, as if that's what actually happened, but it's obviously not.
Floyd had no gun to put out on him. There was a neck on his...
Yeah, but that's the same, it's one way or another.
A knee on his neck.
One way or another, it's racism, right?
Well, I think shooting him point blank is different. In George Floyd's case, it's probably because he was high as a kite, and the police was actually applying the kinds of pressure point things, knee on neck, that he was told to do. He's probably done 100 times already.
Yeah.
That's what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
That's kind of where he got thrown under the bus.
Yeah.
Because he's like, that's what we're supposed to do, But in France, they don't typically shoot. Especially if they're not armed. There's not. If you're responding to an armed threat, of course, you come in with the guns raised, and chances are someone's going to fire something.
You have to wait until the actual, investigation and the court case and all that kind of stuff comes out to find out what actually went on. I'm not saying it's justified, but that kind of the details, the context in which it happened, probably will serve to kind of like put a slightly different spin on it, not that it'll absolve the cop or anything like that, but and then there's the mother. I blame the parents. Do you blame? You should blame the parents.
I blame the culture.
If you just go down to the bottom of that article, the very bottom, and play the video, that one right there.
Ils m'ont enlevé un bébé. C'était encore un enfant. Il avait besoin de sa mère. Ce matin, il m'a fait un gros bisou, il m'a dit maman, je t'aime. Je lui ai dit fais attention à toi. Je lui ai dit je t'aime, fais attention à toi. Voilà. Voilà, on est sortis en même temps. Il est parti prendre un McDo, je suis partie travailler comme tout le monde. 1 heure après, on me dit que quoi? On a tiré sur mon fils. Je vais faire quoi? Je vais faire quoi? J'en ai qu'un, j'en ai pas 10, j'en ai qu'un. C'était ma vie, c'était mon meilleur ami, c'était mon fils, c'était tout pour moi. On était complices comme pas possible. Merci beaucoup pour votre soutien. Wallah, merci beaucoup. Je vous remercie beaucoup, beaucoup, beaucoup. Je sais plus quoi vous dire. Merci.
Yeah, so she was a single mother. The father
Right.
just disappeared the
Right.
night after.
And he was her best
17
friend.
years ago.
17-year-old boy was her best friend.
Yeah, that was creepy. Those types don't turn out well in any setting. And she's since gone on to, like, she's the poster child of the revolution. She called for a revolt in a
Right.
statement.
Yeah, she
She's
didn't.
been laughing, smiling, and held aloft a big crowd of people who got the T-shirt and the theme and everything for the revolution.
Yeah. Don't know what she's doing.
She's
None of
nuts.
these people know what they're doing is the thing, you know. So, yeah, the point is there's not really a solution to this. There is a solution, like we said, but it's a solution that...
No, it's a solution. Yeah, sorry, you first. What's the solution?
Well, what we talked about earlier, you know, but it would involve... It's 20 years too late, like you talked about Putin. Putin structured Russian society in such a way, you know, from a knowledgeable perspective, knowing, you know, the diverse nature of the Russian Federation, the peoples and the religious beliefs in the Russian Federation, and he played to that basically, and he made sure that policies and laws passed.
Well,
encouraged the proper functioning or the peaceable functioning of that kind of a pluralistic and diverse society, right, where you get validation from the president, from the government, etc., etc., etc.
That makes him sound like a namby-pamby. The first thing he did was he crushed
of course,
a Muslim
Daniels.
rebellion in Dagestan and Chechnya.
Yeah.
I mean, he destroyed it. He absolutely leveled the place. And then he turned to other Muslim-majority regions like, I forget the name, it begins with a K, Kazan, which is kind of much more central and closer to Moscow. And he said, do you still want to leave Russia? I mean, you have to do that first. Then he came in and he rebuilt it.
Yeah.
And then he made equal laws, and then he led by example. But you have to use a stick. Who's willing to do that?
There's nobody in the West
Who
gonna do
is
that.
willing to do
you need
that?
to overhaul the entire system and the entire political class and get rid of them because they're all in their secular liberal mindset, and those people just don't work. They're not going to do that. You know what I mean? So you do need a revolution in France in a certain sense,
That's
or
what-
in any other country. You need. I'm probably going. I hope I don't get banned for saying that. But
No. Revolution.
political-
Revolution is a dangerous word in the circumstances. What I replied to Bertrand was, yes, but for one thing to be different, everything would need to be different. You would need a paradigm shift in the very mentality of the elites.
revolution of thinking.
Therefore, I suppose it is a revolution. You need new elites, or somehow Macron forces a regime change himself from within, because everything would have to change. This universalism, bullshit. Stop it. Crush it. Do whatever it takes to physically stop it. Don't namby-pamby it. That's the first thing. But as well as a big stick, you need to actually get in there and truly sort it out. Instead of going, well, there are competing interests in Paris. And you know what? In the end, I'll just let them play off. At least they're all contained over there in their small banlieues on the periphery of the cities. Better not. Police, don't just bother going in. We'll leave them as no-go zones. For the most part, they're contained. They erupt now and again. To hell with it. No, like that attitude, that whole political philosophy and attitude would have to be a regime change. That's why it's impossible. That's why we say, let it all reach its conclusions. But I'm not a total doomer on this. There's going to be stuff that survives. In the United States right now, recently, there were protests in Dearborn, Michigan, which is ironically a Muslim majority, parts of it, Muslim majority neighborhoods. They're recent emigres. They're not going back 60 years. So they're pretty much since the wars in the Middle East, they've moved to the United States. They're patriotic. We're American. And they're surrounded by people who still tend to see Osama bin Laden whenever they see one of them. However, they're protesting recently against their kids being in the local schools, having to do LGBTQI CIA plus indoctrination. They're like, no, we don't want to cause a fuss in this country because you all tend to see us as Osama bin Ladens. But on this issue, we're digging our heels in. They're not going to those classes and they're pulling them out. And the whiteys surrounding them are going, I agree with that. I see something I have in common with them. And those things will survive the coming turmoil. People will realize, lots of people, I don't know how many, but enough people are going to realize what they have in common. I think it's wishful thinking that this is going to lead to a race war, you know, in France, in the United States, and everything. This has been the CIA's wet dream ever since the 1960s, you know, with the whole helter-skelter bullshit and what was the name of the crazy cult, you know, Manson, Charlie Manson. You know, the big conspiracy at the heart of that weird series of murders in Hollywood was that Manson was trying to start a race war by killing that group here and then that group there. Ha moha, and then they would all cook up. And it was batshit crazy, but there were CIA ties to that. That is the kind of ultimate wet dream of how they see their control lasting in perpetuity for all eternity. It's not going to work in France either. This will blow over too. And people will still continue to, for the most part, see the commonalities they share with others, no matter how...
Yeah, when things get bad, if things get worse, that's the saving grace in a certain sense, where things, you know, economically, etc., get worse, and then people start to realize, and you'd hope like that people start to realize the commonality they have, and that, you know, we all need to kind of band together or work together to provide for, you know, and France has that to its credit in a certain sense, has that to in it's kind of atomized in a certain sense. There's a lot of, like, you know, local governance in France and local identities and that kind of stuff, where everybody, whoever lives in that town or that village or whatever, kind of tend to see themselves as all from that particular place, you know what I mean, or from loyal or to that particular place. Yeah, but the problem is people were saying this is like immigrants trying to, their hot take being this is what immigration does to, you know, recent immigration into Europe or in America, whatever, and that's why we should stop immigration. But these kind of riots and stuff don't happen from recently arrived immigrants. They're not. They don't have the network within the country, or the you know the kind of cohesiveness as disparate immigrants coming in to put the band together and create the kind of chaos that you've seen in France over the past few days. That can only happen when you've got from people who are you know, French people living in the country and know where everything is, know where the local police station is, know how to get into it. You know, they've a network in the same as anybody else in France would have. You know, that's how you can have this level of disruption. You know, so it's not immigrants. It's not the the people that came off the boat last week who are doing this. You know what I mean? But yeah. We'll have to see where it goes. But here's one thing. Again, just speaking to the level of bullshit that people you have to put up with, and how you should never take anything at face value. Remember the Chinese spy balloon?
Yeah.
Yeah. Remember that?
UFOs? No. Yeah. No. Spy balloons.
Remember what it was all about?
Yeah.
Chinese spy balloon did not collect information over the US, Pentagon says 3 months later. Despite the fact that...
They still call it a spy balloon.
Despite the fact that was the thing, that was the only reason this was a problem, was because it was spying.
Yeah.
No, actually it wasn't. And we knew that at the time, but we pretended it was just to work everybody up and shoot it down and look like a bunch of assholes. So, an example of why you shouldn't do hot takes on things.
They're coming for our nukes.
And then...
Look at that. They directed it over Montana. Remember that?
Yeah.
Montana, Dakota, they were aiming it at silos and shit. It was a weather balloon that blew off, of course.
Fucking hysteria, like.
Yeah.
And then, Trump stole the documents, right? And kept them, top secret documents that he was going to use to give our enemies information about our top secret locations of nukes or whatever. Well, this is from a few days ago, but this is ABC who had obtained, ABC I suppose obtained it, audio recording of Trump discussing classified documents. Just have a listen.
Breaking news. ABC News has obtained an audio recording of former President Trump appearing to acknowledge that he held onto a sensitive military document after leaving the White House. More now from ABC's senior investigative reporter, Aaron Katersky.
Well, with Milley, let me see that. I'll show you an example. He said that I wanted to attack Iran. Isn't it amazing? I have a big pile of papers. This thing just came up. Look. This was him. They presented me this. This is off the record, but they presented me this. This was him. This was the Defense Department and him.
On the recording, Trump is heard attacking the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, and referencing a document that Trump claimed Milley had compiled.
This totally wins my case, you know. Except it is like highly confidential, secret. This is secret information. See, as president, I could have did less about it. Now I can't, you know, but this is classic.
The contents of the recording, made during a July 21st, 2021 meeting at Trump's Bedminster, New Jersey golf club, have been previously reported and are quoted in the Justice Department's 37-count indictment related to Trump's handling of classified documents after leaving office. But the recording itself had never been heard publicly until now. Trump pleaded not guilty this month to those 37 counts, and a campaign spokesperson sent the following statement to ABC News in response to the audio recording. The audio tape, the statement said, provides context proving once again that President Trump did nothing wrong at all.
All right. So, pause there. You can close it. So this is Trump classified documents and then talking about those classified documents to other people, and that's the crime. But the details are that he was talking about, in this case, he was talking about, it's an example of the kind of things he was talking about. He was using these documents to show that he was surrounded by a bunch of war hawks who were trying to invade Iran, and he didn't want to, and they're trying to convince him or force him to invade Iran. That's irrelevant, right?
Right. No, I don't.
In the public discourse, in terms of people's assessment, or giving people the opportunity to make a good assessment of what this case against him is actually about, just limited to he took documents, he talked about the documents to other people. Don't tell him what the documents were or what he was talking about.
Yeah, I actually can't follow them anymore. When they're saying breaking news, okay, they've got me braced. Okay, here we go. What is it? And then they say Trump said illegal things about illegal documents, which actually he's supposed to have. Okay, what did he say? He said something that makes him look awesome. Okay, what's your point? I actually can't follow through what they're trying to suggest. That he's a bad man, that he should be in jail.
Yeah. Well, they're just leaving it at documents,
sense.
Confidential documents or top secret documents that he took home and didn't give back. It's not that he took them home. It's that when he was asked for them back, he said, I don't have them, or allegedly said, I don't know where they are. I lost them, or they're somewhere, whatever. So that's all it is. It's basically, because it's not a crime to take the documents home, but supposedly the crime is when you're asked for them back, and then they add on the fact that he talked about these documents, the contents of these documents, to some people. That was one example of what he was talking about, and you can extrapolate from that probably what he was talking about to these people. He was saying, wait till you see what these documents I have that I brought home with me, which I'm allowed to, wait till you see what they, wait till you see how they, the really bad light they portray a lot of people who were surrounding me while I was president in. Wait till you see. And that's the crime. The crime is revealing Washington state secrets of warmongering and corruption. And they're terrified, and they literally want to put him in jail for revealing secrets, like Julian Assange.
Yeah. Yeah. Shut him up. Yeah. Meanwhile, the Biden's just escalating crimes. You said it several weeks ago, it's going to catch up with them and dog them big time. And it does seem to be increasing the actual coverage of them, the uncomfortable questions,
Yeah, just dodging them, just ignoring them. No, Biden saying no, he didn't.
And you're thinking it's going to all add up to some kind of a major snafu at the next election.
Can it be contained?
Can you outdo Colonel McGregor, who suggested that we won't even make it to the 2024 election?
What do you mean, we're all going to die?
Oh, the US is so like. I don't know.
I think when he said that, he probably meant that there would be some issue with the election in that sense, where it wouldn't be able to be held or wouldn't be success. It wouldn't come to completion.
In the context he was saying it, it was like economic collapse or some external.
Maybe. It could be. Who knows? It's all brewing. Like it's a year from now, so it's going to be a wild ride for the next year. One thing that really pissed me off, and this is the last thing I'm going to say today, is that how people who comment on the situation, let's say with Russia, Ukraine, etc., or China, the spy balloon, all that kind of stuff, seem to completely miss the fundamentals underlying everything that the US is doing and everything that they say about Ukraine, what they're doing in Ukraine, what they've done in Ukraine, their support, all of that support for Ukraine, and all their talk about China. How everybody who looks at those statements or looks at those events or what they're doing, looks at that situation, totally misunderstands or is willfully ignorant of the obvious underlying motivation for them doing what they're doing. That it's not about freedom and democracy. It's not about, getting Putin because he's an evil dictator. It's not because China is a one-party state and a dictatorship and they're going to have us all speaking Chinese next year. We're trying to protect American freedom and democracy. And the fact that it's not about those things, that it's about something else. And that something else is openly stated by the movers and shakers in Washington, D.C. Just put that up there. It's only 30 seconds. This is Blinken. Russian subtitles.
The Cold War era is over, and there is a profound competition underway right now to shape what comes next. I don't want to minimize it. We did have, in many ways, an era of extraordinary progress. But then, of course, we've seen the emergence of major disruptors that are now, I think, pushing us past that era. So we have to find ways to make sure that not only are we in the room, not only are we at the table, but hopefully we're at the head of the table.
That's exactly the analogy you were giving for several years now.
So, yeah.
That there's people coming to the table and they're just asking the guy at the head of the table, look, can we just
share more?
Share a bit better? You can stay ahead, but let's just be, more fair. And the guy's like, no, I'll fucking turn this table over. If
you take any of my stuff. Yeah. But it's interesting that he says that. And what he says there, I mean, it shouldn't be strange to anybody. Well, first of all, because he's saying it publicly. It's not the first time him and others have said the same thing publicly. But it explains absolutely everything that America is doing in Ukraine and vis-a-vis China and in terms of Nord Stream 2 and Russiagate and all of the propaganda that in order to stay, like he said, hopefully at the head of the table, they're using all sorts of underhanded, skullduggerous, means and methods and lies in order to achieve that. Yeah. But people just take their lies at face value. It's like someone saying like somebody after 9/11 or whatever said someone in the US military, some high level guy said, in war, you have to understand that in war we're going to lie. When it's a war, there's going to be lies. Propaganda is a big part of any war, so we're going to lie about it. But there's so many people out there don't know that. Even though this guy would say it, or Blinken would say this, they don't seem to understand that there's a changing world. America has been at the head of the table for the last century, let's say, but the world is now changing, and China and Russia are, just by the mere fact of the size of the countries and their populations and the energy resource they have, they're starting to assert themselves more, and they're saying, listen, the world is changing, we're coming online, and we're going to have a kind of more shared multipolar world. And the Americans like Blinken have shit their pants about that and say, no fucking way, that's not happening ever. We're remaining top dog forever, and we're going to take you down by any means necessary. And a big part of those means is going to be lying and spreading disinformation about you and all sorts of underhanded methods. He said that's basically what he's saying. Yeah. And then you see those underhanded methods, and including that it's lies and disinformation, and you go, oh no, but Blinken said that he just told you before he told the lie that he was going to lie. Did you miss that part? I'm going to lie. What I'm about to say is a lie in order to achieve, to secure America's...
And then he follows it with Russia blew up Nord Stream. They did blow up Nord Stream.
Russia blew up Nord Stream.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you see, it's very simple. He's just pretending that Russia
invaded Ukraine for absolutely no reason whatsoever. Yeah, Russia invaded Ukraine for no reason.
Yeah.
No, he just told you
why he's going to bullshit you in that way. But who,
and for me, this is my last piece. That's like government, geopolitics, the top level, at basic saying we are dishonest to people. And then they expect honesty. Well, look how it trickles down. Calgary Herald, so this must be a Canadian issue. No, Harvard professor, United States. Headline last week. Harvard professor who studies honesty accused of falsifying data.
But was it for the greater good, Neil?
And you've no honest man in government, and therefore no honest anywhere in any of the intelligentsia. That's why the whole culture is effed.
The point is, I don't have a problem. I'm not calling them liars, and they should be. I'm not saying that undermines their perspective. I'm just saying understand, recognize that they lie in order to achieve their objectives. We can discuss their objectives as to and you can decide which side you're on, whether you agree with their objectives or whether you agree with, because America's objectives are that the world remains a unipolar world with America at the top. Russia and China's objective.
But they're not honest about that. It's the fact that they lie.
Well, he just said it.
So odious.
He just said it.
Yeah.
Blinken just said it. So I'm saying they're open about it. And the implication is that in order to achieve this unipolar world and maintain the unipolar world with America at the top, we're going to lie and attack our adversaries in underhanded ways and do all sorts of sabotage and subterfuge in order to, because that increases the chance that we'll remain at the top of the table. Now, as an American, do you want to side with me in doing that? You should. But so I have no problem with people aligning with America's objective to remain at the top table in a unipolar world. And I also don't have a problem with them lying to achieve that, to using all these underhanded tactics to achieve it. I have a problem with the people who are so fucking stupid that they don't realize that. That they suck up the lies. It's okay, because I'm sure Russia and China sell probably less than America, but they spread some lies and disinformation, especially as part of war or as part of geopolitics and that kind of stuff. They'll send out signals. But generally speaking, I think they have less of a need to spread lies. They can get what they want, a multipolar world, by telling the truth, because America is the one who started off telling lies in order to achieve, and needs to tell lies to achieve its unipolar position, because fundamentally, from a broad scale kind of moral standpoint, the idea of one country ruling the world sounds a lot like a dictatorship. It's not really morally defensible. Yeah. So someone who's taken that position tends to have to lie more, because generally speaking, global morality, let's say, would say, yeah, you don't have the high ground there if you want to rule the world on your own, when there's other countries and you have to keep them down so you can rule the world. Russia and China are saying we want multipolar world, and all we have to do is point out the lies that this guy is trying to tell in order to maintain his unipolarity. So that's why you have more lies coming from the West than from the East. And I don't mind if people take a position and say, you know what, America is the best and should be the best and should be the top dog in the world in perpetuity, because it's got the best system, capitalism, wildlife, all that kind of stuff, whatever way they want to spin it. I have no problem with them siding with that, but at least recognize that you have to lie to achieve that. You have to lie to the rest of the world to achieve that. Don't believe the lies yourself, because then you're a real idiot, Anyway.
That's always what you're hoping for.
Yeah.
For them to just be honest about what they're...
Well, they do.
Don't confuse that for honesty. A psychopath will tell the true thing in the moment if it suits whatever he's trying to do.
But
I'm not suggesting he is one per se, but they will occasionally say the truth.
Of course.
But it's not. It's never like actually,
only when it serves their interests.
It's like a broken clock is right twice a day kind of thing.
No,
that's why I threw up that article. You've got a situation where it's so entrenched that the person whose job it is to study honesty is dishonest. That's why it's intractable. The problem is non-fixable.
And it's not even competing systems. It's not like China necessarily has a competing system, a competing social kind of system or system of government that it wants to spread around the world. It's all at the economic level that America is concerned about losing its power at the economic level. It's not like China's going to spread across the world or Russia's going to spread its culture or its people across the world. They just want more access to economic resources and a larger share of the pie that they're entitled to based on their on the value or the wealth of their countries. So it's not, they try and spin it as we have to stop China because communism, we have to stop Russia because I don't know, Putin or something. Authoritarianism. But they're not trying to, those two countries aren't trying to spread communism or authoritarianism around the world. That's not what America's pushing back against. They pretend that that's what the threat is, but the actual threat is the growing economic clout of those two countries, and how America is in such a position that it can no longer, the whole facade of American exceptionalism because it's such a wonderful country and capitalism and look how well we live is all based on them having an unfair share of the global economic pie. So when other countries come in and say, we want equal shares, so you're going to have to take a cut, and that spells doom for America's whole facade of, you know, the greatest nation in the world. It will no longer be the greatest nation in the world. So you can understand they're in an existential crisis, but it's still not morally justified from a very baseline morality that's been around in human civilization forever. Like, you know, the guy who wants to, you know, rule over everybody and dictate terms and keep other people down by force doesn't have the moral high ground. Yeah. By anybody's standard. Anyway, will we call quits? You've been talking for way too long here. Scotty's falling asleep already.
And we're getting the spammers in the comments.
Spammers?
Yeah, it's time to get out. When the spammers are collecting...
Jeez, they must have noticed us. Spammers noticed. All right, so we'll leave it there for this week, folks. Thanks for watching. Thanks for commenting. Don't forget to like all the likey buttons and notifications and stuff like that. And we'll be back next week with another show. So until then, have a good one.
Thanks for watching. Bye all.
Can't stop the signal now.